Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about one of the most crucial transportation modes for people who live in the far north of our country. Of course, the seasonal ice roads that allow supplies and travel to some of the most rural and hard to access in the winter. So Bill and our guest today went on an excursion up to the northernmost reaches of Ontario and Manitoba to get a firsthand experience of how crucial and also how dangerous and potentially deadly some of these roads can be, so especially if you're not careful. And our guest also has an interesting little anecdote on one of the episodes we did a couple of weeks ago on the passenger train in Ontario, and he will give us his 2 cents, I should say, on that as well. All of that coming up, but first, a word from today's sponsor, Source for Sports.
Sports aren't just what we do, they're who we are. Source for Sports North Bay is your advocate, your local support system, and your biggest fan. 1321 Fisher Street has grown from a place where knowledgeable experts can help you find exactly the gear you need, to the hotbed of team uniforms, apparel and fanwear, to a community stronghold for all the things that truly matter to you and your family's sports journey. We love helping you find your first pair of skates, as much as we relish supporting local leagues, teams, and athletes. Wherever your sports journey takes you, make sure you visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street so we can help you along your way.
We're joined by our official third co-host of the show. It almost feels like we have a friend of the show, Brian Emblem, back on for his 3rd, 5th, 80th time on the show. How are you doing, Brian?
You can call me behind the scenes, Brian.
Behind the scenes, I like that.
Well, that's a behind the scenes, Brian. I think that's an appropriate term because of my friend in Timmins, Ontario. Look at his shirt, City with a Heart of Gold, and Brian's been on many adventures with Backroads Bill, and so it's deserving that he's once again on the Backroads Bill podcast. What we're going to talk about, going on the longest winter road in the world. But Ben, you wanted to ask Brian a question right away about a previous podcast.
Yeah, we're like the 3 Bs.
Yeah,
Bill, Brian, Ben.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, this was interesting. 2 weeks ago, we did the episode with Linda Savory Gordon, where we talked about not the Northland. I know that was part of it, but more about passenger rail. Especially, she's really she's on some boards. And Brian had a few comments underneath, and I thought since he's on the show, we should probably just get his take on that episode. So Brian, I want to turn it over to you a little bit because we were talking about this a little bit off air about just your kind of opinion on passenger trains and kind of the state of them right now.
Yeah, so I watched that episode. It was very interesting. That lady is clearly very knowledgeable. But I had a few thoughts that I'd picked up over the years working with various people in different industries. And one of the things you have to sort of realize in Canada, for example, regular highways and paved roadways, Highway 17, Trans-Canada Highway, all that stuff, is built, maintained, and owned by the people, the government, whatever, right? All of us put together. Railroad beds and railroads nowadays are built, maintained, and built and maintained by the railroad company itself. So there's really not a fair playing field there when it comes to, let's say, comparison shopping for shipping lumber, which doesn't expire. There's no rush to get anywhere, not like milk. Shipping it from here to Chicago or whatever, the playing field's not exactly fair there. So then other people have talked about, perhaps the railroad bed should be owned by the government and then have a mechanism to pay it back usage-wise. But, we all can't drive on the railroad. So then it points to the other thing, which is, so people talk about the British railway system. British railway system, fantastic railway, best in the world, blah, blah, blah. So what you find out there is gasoline in England is super expensive. A large component of the price of gas is tax, which goes and funds the railroad company. So in essence, a subsidy, which in our country, the word subsidy that's just not in our vocabulary. That is not something that we are comfortable talking about even. So that's going to have to change a mentality when it comes to, if we're going to make a comparison to the British or whatever. And then the third thing I said in my head was, or even on the commentary, actually, I said, if the government is very concerned about carbon, you have to motivate people to get off carbon. So a way to do that, it's not popular, it is not popular at all, is price gasoline for regular people to a point where it becomes more attractive to use public transportation, railroads. But of course, you have to have the railroads in place for people to do that, right? But it could become a carbon, if this carbon world and this global warming stuff starts to hit home more, you may see that where we have a different mentality. So, for example, in Europe, in France, when you take the train, it shows you on the wall. There's a little meter. It says you have saved X tons of carbon by taking the train today on this distance. It's a thing over there. It's a thing in different places. So, for example, Luxembourg, public transportation, trolleys, trains, buses, it's all free. It's not your reason for not taking public transit is not because you can't afford it. It's free. It's all subsidized. Again, that word subsidized, right? Nobody likes that. Anyway, just some random thoughts on the last week's episode, and I thought I would open some discussion, but nobody else has piped in yet, I've noticed. So let's see where that goes.
Well, that's kind of a segue into we didn't take the train, and you can't take a train to the most northern community in Ontario, being Washoe or Fort Severn, and of course this whole epic adventure on the longest seasonal road in the world from Peawanuck back through Fort Severn to Shamattawa in Manitoba, 767 kilometers, 447 miles, whatever the conversion is there. And that's what we did most recently. And it's subsidized, that's for sure in a sense, because First Nations have to apply for the road building. But that was what was on our radar screen. That's why Brian's on the Backroads Bill podcast today, Ben.
I just wanted him to be on here. That's all. That's
okay.
why.
He's on.
Kidding. No, we are here because we are talking about the recent trip that you guys took back in March. We're now here in mid-April. This will be coming out kind of near the later end of April. And obviously now a completely different world that we live in because it's not as much snow. So you wouldn't be able to make the trip now, I'm assuming.
The road would be closed most likely, and you use at your own risk, as we found out when we were up there. And the other thing at the time, I thought you were going to go into talking about Donald Trump, but
No.
But during that time, Donald Trump had come on the stage and was already flexing his muscles, and had been talking about the 51st state. So one of the things that Brian and I talked about en route was, when Donald Trump takes over and become the 51st state, will he rename, because of his leanings, would he change the Trans-Canada Highway? So
probably. I mean, he changed the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, he did, to the Gulf of America. And and the lead to my stories, and as Brian well knows, this is what happens when you don't take a vacation to the Gulf of America and you do something really Canadian. So that's a good intro to what we did. But Brian, tell us about what we had to do. We left Timmins, and again, your shirt is very apropos, but tell the listeners and the viewers what we had to do just to get to Gillam, because over the course, we did more than 6,000 kilometers, more than 4,000 miles in just shy of 8 days. So anyway, take it away.
Yeah, so the first day of our trek was Timmins to Winnipeg, which is about 1,500 kilometers, and that was about a 15-hour day of driving. And then the next morning, short sleep in Winnipeg. Next day, 1,000 kilometers up to Gillam. So Gillam is in northern Manitoba. Pretty much the road stops there. You can't go. I didn't realize this, but the only way you can get to Churchill, Manitoba, is by train or boat or airplane. But there is no road to Churchill ever. So it's a train-only place. And that's where our adventure starts, is Gillam, Manitoba. It's a small community, mostly people who work for the Manitoba Hydro. There's a large number of hydroelectric dams there. So we had just to get there, about 25 hours in the car together. You get to know people really well when you travel 25 hours in the car together with them.
One thing I'll pipe in there about, we went to the we went to the longitudinal center of Canada, which is just east of Winnipeg by line of longitude. And then it was a real eye-opener, again, about a month ago. But, I've been across Canada a few times, but you get to Manitoba, then in the morning, as Brian said, you wake up and you start going north because we're headed towards Thompson. And that big sky country is so flat because you truly are on the prairies. And then one of the first things we saw off in the distance, we thought, and it is so flat, the fields and everything, and you see the little islands of trees. And there, of course, are the farmsteads. These are wind shelters. But off in the distance, you saw this blip on the horizon. And it was a grain elevator when we finally got there, a historic one at that, because apparently the research indicates there's only X number of them across in the 3 prairie provinces. And so that was really our first camera shoot. But headed north, Brian, there were so many interesting things to see compared to Northern Ontario. And so, but Brian, maybe you can mention a few just on our way up to get to Thompson and then to Gillam on that second day.
So like you mentioned, the silo,
the grain elevator,
was very unique. That's something we don't see. Yeah, we don't see that around here. Not like you say, a historical unit. There wasn't not many left anymore. We saw these giant blue. Hard to describe what they look like.
Blue igloos,
drums, but they're like 4 times the size of a regular drum. It turns out that they're man-made beehives to promote bee pollination of the foodstuff that's grown over that way. It was you don't see that very often. We saw a giant goose. We saw a giant pheasant or partridge, I guess. Basically, the giant goose is very much like the one in Winnipeg or Wawa, I should say, but for a different reason. And I didn't realize this, but the goose was an endangered species at one time. It took a guy from that area to figure that out, and he brought them back.
And then eventually we got onto Tom Cochrane's highway near Thompson, Manitoba. What's the song called? Tom Cochrane's song? Life is a Highway. So part of the highway is designated to him. And of course, Thompson, Manitoba is a mining town, nickel, much like Sudbury, I guess, but a smaller version. And then, of course, as Brian said, we get to Gillam. The next day, we get up and it's dark and gassing up. But I guess at that stage, it was $2.50 a liter. But we went to the where the road begins, because again, in this seasonal road, there are very few signs, if only at the beginning. No gravel, no weather reports, no road reports. So once you get to the beginning, Brian, I mean, it was dark and it had snowed. There were no tire tracks, and I don't know. Maybe you could say how you felt.
Yeah, it was a bit eerie. I thought eerie, I guess. So you go up the regular highway a little bit, and then there's a side road that hasn't been, well, it's been plowed originally, but it hasn't been plowed that morning. And there's got to be I don't know, the size of the sidewall of your tire thick, full of snow that's loose, and we were the first people on there for the day. There's no cell coverage. There's no radio. Well, there's no real, thankfully on satellite radio. Otherwise, we have nothing else to talk about. There's a feeling of very, very loneliness. If you take the ditch, doesn't appear to be anybody coming behind you. But we were the first people that morning to be on the road. But later on, we did come across some people. So people do use the road, big truckers. It's not an ice road as you see on that television show where they're crossing vast stretches of lake and whatnot. It's more of a frozen tundra, bulldozed and flattened with a grader pulling some giant tires. But you do have some ice road elements where you cross rivers and some small lakes and whatnot. And those are the ones you could actually our average speed for that 700 kilometers was something like 45 kilometers an hour, extremely slow. The day we went, we were extremely lucky with the weather. Had it been windy or snowing, you would have a hard time making out where the road is. You're on this flat tundra with bumps, and it's quite undulating. Like, I was blown away that tractor trailers could make it up over these little humps without bottoming out, and they actually can make it. But it's quite lonely, but then you come to Well, we came to actually an accident scene where a fuel tanker had fallen off the road. Most of the road is easily 2 vehicles wide. But we got to this one section where it was down to 1 vehicle wide, and the tractor trailer had fallen off. And there was 3 of them together, so the 2 went and dropped their load, and they came back. And unfortunately, the fellow driving broke his arm and had to be flown out. I guess they brought him to the next community, which would have been Shamattawa, which is a small reserve on the Manitoba side of the line up there. So we waited for them to do their thing and unload it, and then we snuck around them, and then we stopped at Shamattawa to get gas. Before we got to Shamattawa, though, Bill, I don't know, you want to take that on?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. We I don't know if we really knew. We kind of said there'd be a checkpoint. So there's a good CBC YouTube interview on Shamattawa. There's a significant drug problem in this small Cree community. So when you get there, you could be searched, asked for ID, and in the back, they opened up the back and opened up our jerry cans of gas, not looking for anything else, but we thought we'd be, if we weren't, smuggling in homebrew in those containers. So
it's almost like going in over the border.
It was like going into Mexico, or even now so into the United States, where you're really questioned about your existence and what you're going to do. Because there's not, again, I would say, the trucks are going steady back and forth from Thompson to deliver, because they have about a 6-week plus or minus window and they just do that constantly. We found out that there are no restrictions on daytime travel for them. They don't have to keep logs, and the road has to be open, or their insurance could become null and void. But anyway, it was a checkpoint, and then they checked people coming in from the community, because that is the closest point, even though it's approximately 200 kilometers to Gillam. They check anyway. So that was a little different. And then we ventured over to the northern store on our way back, and then compared. That's the first shock that you get about food prices and how they are subsidized. And even subsidized, they're incredible. So, but anyway,
give us an example. Like how?
Well, a can of pop would be about $6, but they don't subsidize that. I don't know, anything like bananas. It's in one of my stories, but I don't know what you bought, Brian. But what was the price of? You bought something healthy.
So I remember at the very end, I took photos in Peawanuck, and a cardboard carton of milk, unsubsidized, was $20. They show you both prices. It says $20 in the fine print, and it's subsidized. It's still $10. Like, that's insane.
Is the subsidized available for everyone, or do you have to be living in the community, or how does that, who is it, just the government subsidizing it?
Yeah, I would say anyone living in these northern communities gets this subsidy.
So if you went, when you went to get that carton of milk, you'd have to pay $20.
No, you get the subsidized price.
You get the subsidized price, okay.
Yeah, you get the subsidized price. The other interesting part is we ventured on, because we were still in Manitoba, we have to cross the border between Ontario and Manitoba, somewhere in the middle of the hinterland, and then we have to cross back into Eastern time, because we're in Central time. But it's an interesting stretch of road where up to, I don't know, was over maybe another 200 kilometers or thereabouts, where there was 18 vehicles of different descriptions stuck in the muskeg. Some, Brian, from when they make the road and they just leave them, a bulldozer would get stuck, and so they try to pull it out with another bulldozer, it would get stuck, and so they just stay there. But I think the eeriest was when we came across that transport.
Yeah, so when they make the road, you got to do your best to get out, because the duration is so short. You got to start as soon as you can, and some spots are not exactly frozen yet, and the big machines punch through, and they're stuck there until they come back towards the end of the season and get them out. So those are the vehicles or the equipment that you see on the road that's sort of there. But then you come across a tractor trailer that's been there a couple of years now, and it's not going anywhere. It's
there for there, and other vehicles too that have been there for years. They'll never be yanked out for someone's just walked away from it as a bad debt, because it can't be retrieved.
So does it? Because this is water, right?
Well, this frozen muskeg, as Brian said, and so it's muskeg, and it's like
What's muskeg? I don't know what
muskeg is probably, there are 4 wetland types, but muskeg is that transitional when it solidifies that you can walk on it. It's spongy.
So it's kind of like a bog, kind of
bog, but there is some until it freezes. You can't really cross it. So, and of course, on our route as we head north gradually, we're flirting with the tree line and the true tundra, and so you get this transitional area that has some trees, bonsai-like trees, and that was very prevalent when we went from Fort Severn to Weenius First Nation, or what's called Peawanuck. So that's the terrain. But again, you don't see, other than the plow operators and the trucks, and then occasionally you'll see somebody from the communities trying to get in or out. It was the March break for them. So, but there was very, very little traffic. But maybe you can describe the terrain, Brian, as you crossed, and it's almost endless.
Oh yeah, it becomes I'm not gonna say hypnotic, but the lighting on our way in, the lighting was very flat, and it was a cloudy day, and you had a hard time telling between the snow and the sky. And if you're downhill skier at all, you'll know what I mean when I say flat light. You couldn't make out the undulations. You'd be driving along at your 35, then you'd be getting confidence, you'd be doing 45 kilometers an hour, and then all of a sudden there's a big giant dip in the road or a giant bump in the road or something, and there's your gear is jumping up and down, and Bill's yelling slow down. And
well, you can't take your eyes off the road. So you just not and it's and again, as Brian said, the snowbanks are your guardrails, and in at night, because that day we didn't roll in. I mean, I don't know if we got our heads down until about 2 a.m. But in Fort Severn. But at night it's easier because you can't. Because you have your headlights. You see the undulations, and so it's quite a road. And of course, as we got closer to Fort Severn, we did see some polar bear tracks that we saw the next day because we had to do our pit stop, and we met George, our Cree guide from the last adventure we did when we flew in from Sioux Lookout, went there and then up the coast to get to the the furthest point in the border of Manitoba, Ontario, and Nunavut, its jurisdiction. And so, but anyway, George met us and we put our head down, and the next day we still had to get to Peawanuck, which is, you're actually, Fort Severn is Ontario's most northern community, and then you kind of course, we're on Hudson Bay. Most of the communities we know that we hear about, on weather reports like Saskatchewan and Attawapiskat and Fort Albany, well, they're on James Bay, whereas you're right up there on that curve as you go up the Hudson Bay coast. So and so that was that day. So
what do these communities do in the summer? Because obviously a lot of this travel, right? It's primarily in the winter because the ice roads you talked about. You have this 6-week, basically this period for the transports and stuff. So in the summer, they just it's boating and you have to fly stuff in. Like, how do they get goods and stuff into these communities?
Well, Brian can answer that, and I'll add on to that.
Okay, Brian?
Certainly, fly in is the number one way. The barging thing, it doesn't seem to be as popular any longer. Yeah. I'm not sure why, but definitely fly in is everything. So if you don't order your, I don't know, kitchen cabinets or whatever quick enough, you're flying them in.
And I'm sure there's a much larger freight rate for that, right?
Oh, well, yeah. And again, it can triple or quadruple if the road gets closed and they have to deliver it and they take a risk. So, for instance,
that's why milk costs $20.
Get in and go at North Bay Toyota. From the bold and adventurous RAV4 to the fuel-efficient and stylish Corolla Cross to the powerful and rugged Tacoma, there's a Toyota for everyone. Need extra space for the family? The Highlander, Grand Highlander, and Sienna. Want to go green? Check out Toyota's complete lineup of hybrid vehicles like the Prius, Camry, Crown, all-new Crown Signia, and more. Get in and go at North Bay Toyota. Visit them at 640 McEwen North Bay or toyota.com for details.
Fort Severn, for instance, its hub to fly out would be Sioux Lookout. And whereas Peawanuck they will go through Timmins. So even when the road's open in the winter, you just don't jump in your car. That you don't just go visit someone in Peawanuck or where the families are very close and interrelated. It just doesn't happen in the rest of the year because they have to fly through different hubs. So there's no direct flight. In other words, going back and forth from Peawanuck to Fort Severn, which seemed very, very odd. So, but people are reliant on the road for that short period of time, and the rest of the year it's fly in, fly out, and again, very little barge traffic as opposed to the past. And I think too, it has to do on the rivers. You have the Nelson River at Shamattawa, and then the Severn River, and then the Winnesk River, but they're shifting as well. So then we had to get to Peawanuck, and that is very interesting that day was very interesting for a bunch of reasons. But the road then goes through Polar Bear Provincial Park. And when you look at your road map, Ben, digitally or paper-wise, and there's not many folded-up paper maps, I guess, left in the glove compartment, but it's the largest provincial park in Ontario, non-operating, but it covers a huge area. And mostly it's for polar bear habitat and other animals. But that you can describe the terrain on that day, Brian.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough. So that third day or whatever night, we landed at our friend George's house, and then the next day he said, "Hey, you're going to go to Peawanuck. Do you mind if my brother Moses came along?" And that was super great for me. I loved it because somebody else to talk to.
You were done talking to Bill at this point. You were like, "I need someone else."
No, I don't think we'll ever be done. But no, it was lots to talk about.
Yeah.
But he had some very good stories from the old days and some very not good stories from the old days that I didn't really want to hear about. But it's only a 200-kilometer stretch, but it took us all day. Like it took us about 5 hours one way, right? And but it was a bit of a better road. It was a bit smoother. I guess I'm not sure if we were on the lowlands and we were going parallel to the bumps. I'm not sure why it was better, but it was much better. So it's interesting though, like Fort Severn was established in like 1689. Like, can you think about how old that is? That's insane. Timmins is having North Bay is having their 100th
anniversary.
That's nothing. Think about that. 1689.
It's very close to being 400 years old.
We get to Peawanuck. Now, Peawanuck's an interesting spot. It was a rebuilt town back in 1986. The original community was out more towards Hudson's Bay, and it got totally wiped out by a river ice jam situation in the spring, which destroyed everything. Absolutely everything. Gone. Wiped out. Killed 3 people, I believe it was. So this new community got moved 30 kilometers inland in a new spot, and the word Peawanuck means flintstone, like not Fred and Barney, but like stone that you can make fire with. Winnesk, there's nothing there now. Well, I guess of the old airport, there used to be a radar base up there at that location, which I'm not sure which is why the community was sort of around there, but. The radar base is gone a long time ago. Winnesk used to mean groundhog, I guess in the old days, but now they have a new community. It's a bit so nothing there is older than 1985. Whereas in Fort Severn, we got a tour from Moses, and he was showing this is where the fort used to be. The Hudson's Bay post was over here, and across the river was the French fort, and they used to fight. And it was he had some good stories.
Moses was
sure.
a true guide, and this week, George Cucci on the Backroads Bill podcast, we talked about Indigenous cultural awareness and his journey. And in the stories I've written, I said that was the first time that I had in my lifetime to speak and listen intently to a residential school survivor. And as I said to George last week, that, Moses said, not only are you taken away, and you are taken away as a young child, you're also taken away a second time when you go off to high school to Thunder Bay, because you're not taken, then you're just, so you leave your family twice in your life. But the whole, everything he told us, he was very, as we went on and we both gained each other's confidence and confidentiality, I guess, because lots of things I could just never tell. At the end of the conversation, of course, Moses would say, everything you hear about residential schools is true. And in my story, I said, I can't relate to that, but I can only relate to how trauma affects one's life. And so, it was very compelling to hear that. At the same time, he was telling, as Brian mentioned, his dad was a trapper and living off the land because as Moses would say, another thing he said is that we hunt not because we want to, it's because we have to. And so that's that whole aspect of survival. And so it was a great day, Brian, and all the way around.
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly fantastic day. And, Moses made a big difference for us. It was great to have him along. And he got to visit his cousins, which he hasn't seen in a couple of years. A lot of people in the north, they don't have driver's licenses because there's no use to drive. They can't go anywhere.
So the landscape through Polar Bear Provincial Park saw lots of polar bear tracks and things because the polar bears, the females go inland, and it's quite a distance inland. They make snow dens, and then the cubs are born. And then once the cubs are ambulatory, they come out of the snow den and they start to make their way back out to the coast. And so that's very interesting. So that's why you see a lot of tracks on the road, on the sides of the roads, et cetera, et cetera.
Almost like turtles.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of like turtles. And of course, in our previous adventure during COVID up there, I mean, we saw 24 polar bears and had that polar bear incident, which we talked about on the previous Backroads Bill podcast. So the landscape there, the black spruce are more bonsai-like. You do flirt with that tundra existence, whether it's treeless, in and out a bit. And again, getting to Peawanuck, you see a model community that was built after the flood, as Brian explained. And of course, in the news, you hear about Saskatchewan or Attawapiskat in particular wanting to move their community inland. So now I can understand why and how it would look. And it would be a far better day. It was interesting to go into the northern store. Most communities have a northern store. Most people in and around the community, there are certainly more snowmobiles and quads, ATVs to get around. And it's the dead of the winter, and that's it. So that whole aspect of not only being on the road, but to see the lifestyle, which I think, Brian, we all take for granted.
Oh, absolutely. I've said this before. I said I have much admiration for people who live there. Not only just the cost, but the weather, the loneliness, the size of community, the opportunity for young people. All that stuff goes in. But they do have. Our exposure, of course, has been with George and his brother Moses. Not to everybody in the town, but they seem to have a very positive spin on life. They try to do the best they can for the young people. Giving them exposure to the traditional ways was very educational. I'd love to go on those traditional ways, learning things. It would be something for me too, I think. Be awesome.
I was going to ask quickly about the people, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously you've seen the different kind of people. I would assume it's very heavily Indigenous because it's probably the communities that were originally there, right? That there's a history there. That's their land. I imagine there's probably some mining or not a lot of mining people out there. No, not yet, because they're truly on the coast. So there's no bedrock, that's for sure. And so I would think in the past they've explored for gas and oil and those kinds of things, but not yet. But there is some going on. But again, George and Moses would tell us, they didn't have potable water. They were still hauling water out of the Severn River up until 1988, 1990, diesel generators, those kinds of things. So all these stories we came to appreciate. I mean, when they did get diesel power for the first community, or the first freezers were community freezers where everyone shared them. And so the people, other than people providing services like nurses and other types, we actually saw an MTO truck up there because we're in Ontario, back in Ontario. So yeah, very, very few. It's I don't want to say 100%, but these are Indigenous Cree communities. The other interesting thing, before I forget, Brian, as we got to know Moses, is that again they don't. Ben, I know you were going to ask this question. They don't eat polar bears, and they don't eat walruses, and they don't eat seals.
and he went to an Arctic conference. Of course, there's communities all the way around on the Quebec side of Hudson Bay, James Bay, etc. And he pointed out to his colleagues in other communities that their community does not eat polar bears, and that's why there are so many. One reason why there's all these polar bears around. They do not harvest the polar bear. They don't have big game hunters come in, and they only manage a polar bear if it becomes a nuisance.
We talked about this on one of our. I can't remember if it was with Paul.
Yeah.
Because that's the big thing is like, but why? Why wouldn't you? If you think about it as a source of food, and I don't remember the reason, if it had to do with the quality of meat or how hard it was, because I think it's like elk, right? A lot of elk and caribou.
Well, yeah, they hunt moose and caribou, but yeah, it's probably very, very gamey. And, and then, of course, if you harvest one and you're so far away, how are you going to get it back? But I mean, they have snowmobiles and ATVs, but no, and it's not a spiritual. They respect the polar bear, the white bear, because
bear
because
meat's
Washoe,
pretty common, isn't it? Like people will eat that, or is it
not there?
No,
I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak about other communities.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to add to that one, Brian. I don't know if your knowledge exceeds.
Just what Moses was saying. He says, the Cree people typically don't. It's the people more north, the Arctic people, who would. That was his comment. I have nothing else to base it on, of course.
It's the Cree that's up there. That's the
I think now I'm going to get this wrong. 3 or 4. I don't want to even say dialect, but Swampy Cree as opposed to OG Cree, and there's Western Cree, where Paul from another previous podcast, he's from northern Saskatchewan. So yes, different dialects, and of course Moses, he could write in syllables in that Cree syllable message. When you see syllables, he could actually write that. So that was very interesting. Well, but Wapusk, as in the Wapusk Trail, as in that's the name of the winter road. It means white bear. So
wow, because there must be a connection that they have with their culture and their community that you probably don't see as you go further south and as you get more, I want to say more civilized, but as there's more bigger population, right? Like you have to assume that there's probably a little bit more connection to the land and to their ancestry and their roots.
I would say so because of their isolation.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's a long ways from the next community.
Because why else would you because that's the question is like why else would you live in those kind of conditions if there wasn't some sort of connection that you had?
Well, hang on a second though. If your family has been there for 4,000 years, 3,000 years, that's what you're going to do.
That's
right?
what I mean. Yeah, exactly.
It's familiar. Now, talking to Moses, he says we talked about a little bit about heritage and certain things. We think Native people do during different times of the year. And he goes, we don't really practice that stuff any longer. That's pre-colonial stuff. It's sort of gone by the wayside. So, like I was going to say, what did we talk about, Bill? We talked about, community powwows, whatever. And he says, no, we don't do that anymore. That's considered to be old school. But there is a move afoot. The move afoot, though, to bring these young people, expose them to this stuff again, especially the ones that are down out of town in the big city, going to university or college or high school. They'll bring them. There's like a club or whatever, and actually George is part of it, where they take them out, they go moose hunting, and they skin
land-based learning,
right? It's
and yeah,
that's the
Moses
word, yeah.
is in charge of that as kind of the education director or coordinator for the big school in his community, and so that's how they recover a lot of those skills that may have gone by the wayside. So yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, the whole thing is at the time too, and during this time too, as we're still in an election, it was the Canadian thing to do that, and so we were glad to do it. We planned and had everything except the kitchen sink. We were safe with the satellite communication, but again, if you got stranded, you'd have to make sure that you could stay warm and stay hydrated, because you'd have to wait for the next vehicle to come along. And, again, there's no tow truck coming down the road, so you're going to have to figure that out. And so that's what people are faced with if in those communities, if they're going to use that road. And the other thing, no cars drive on the road. Like, you have to have clearance. There's just no way a car can. So your little car in the parking lot is not going to.
Why are you attacking my car in the parking lot?
Well, no, there was a few of them out there outside the studio
it hasn't
here.
done anything to you. Yeah. Actually, I just got it back. I had to get a new battery in it.
Yeah, okay.
So no, it wouldn't have been last week. It would not have been able to go through there.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't want anything to break down out there. That's for sure.
So who maintains this road? Is it MTO? Is it?
Oh, no. Brian will talk about that.
So it's on the Ontario side, I guess it's people from Severn. On the Manitoba side, it's people from, I guess, Shamattawa, and some. There's a bit of, and you can tell the difference level of, I guess, the day we were there. But on the way back, I found it to be, well, first of all, the sun was out. Again, we were super lucky. It wasn't windy, wasn't crazy weather, because if it was, it would be really bad. The sun was out. We could see the undulations. We had a better, comfortable time on the way back. And like Bill said, we had brought everything in I was texting my wife about the prices up there when we were up there, and she said, "Well, we should have brought some stuff from Winnipeg or something." I'm like, we had no room. We had, from the back of the driver's seat to the roof, right to the back of the car, was packed. Sleeping bag, shovel, shotgun, tow rope, gasoline, food, water, Bill's 18 cameras that he brings, and uses every time, by the way. wait! I'm gonna take another camera. Wait, another camera.
We need food. No, we need more cameras.
Yeah, you can never. Well, I always say, you're never going to get back there again. You only have one chance for that money shot, if it is a money shot. So,
have you been up there in the summer?
Well, we went in the first week of October during COVID, when we went by ATV from Fort Severn up to that furthest corner, as I described earlier, the boundary point where the obelisk survey marker is and beyond. So yeah, different view of the landscape, that's for sure. Out on the coast, you truly are on tundra. There are no trees, so it's treeless. And as I said, you flirt with that as the road meanders. It doesn't really meander; it's kind of straight, because when you look at the GPS track, it is the shortest distance between Shamattawa to Washoe or Fort Severn, then off to Peawanuck. So. Yeah, there's no, they don't go around things. They just go across the muskeg.
Okay, Brian, as we wrap up here, where does this rank in terms of your adventures that you've had with Bill? Bill's not allowed to answer, because he'll give me some poetic answer about how every journey is the best journey. How does this rank? That. I would say in the top 5. Does it make the top 5 of adventures you've had with Bill?
Yes, and I'll say why. There's 2 aspects of any adventure, in my opinion. I'm down to 2% on my phone, but don't lose you. There's 2 aspects of every adventure, I think, in my opinion. It's the adventure itself, like, driving this road. It's a thing that it's not everybody wants to do, that's for sure. But it's the people you meet along the way, and the George and Moses are fantastic individuals. I trust them with my life. They're just great people. They have lots of stories to tell. If you knew their life story, they could write it down, I'm sure. But even, people in Thompson, we met people at the gas stations in the middle of freaking nowhere in Manitoba. These people like, well, how did you land here? Those things are part of the trip as well, not just the actual journey, right?
Well, it's certainly in my top 5. The other trip that we've described is also in the top 5, and we're going back to visit another one that's in the top 5 when we go back in a few weeks, 3 weeks, I think, to go back to the Cold War crash when we had Denny True on, who has passed since. Where we're going back and put up a commemorative plaque that Brian and I have made, or had been made, I should say, and we're going to erect it. And that's going to be, I think, a memorable day. So those are just 3 of them. And another one that I don't know if we've ever talked about, the Bethnal Springs. Yep. I don't think have we talked about Bethnal Springs. So there's just a few smatterings of adventures, and it's always great to be with Brian. He's one of the few people I know that says, "Sure, let's do this," and has the right attitude. And this time, of course, we spent a lot of time together as we normally do, but it's certainly not a burden. We have lots of laughs and lots of things like going along and counting the number of trucks from Long Lac to Hearst, or counting the number of even on the Wapas Trail, how many people we see, which is a few. So all these things, or finding out how long you can keep your hands off the wheel in a self-driving car before the beepers and it tells you can't do that anymore. So that's how we pass the time.
Yeah. Well, you have about 10 things on your list of top 5. So anyways, we'll let Brian go before his...
And Brian, maybe we'll get Ben to come with the two of us on a Backroads Bill adventure, which is not... I haven't even had Ben on a Backroads.
Not yet.
But if you want to come with Brian and myself, let's do that. You know what? I think I've got...
New Post Falls.
Okay.
New Post Falls and or the Devil's Rock, a couple of other favorite places in northeastern Ontario.
Well, you hit Devil's Rock on the way up.
All right, we'll make it work. We'll put it into work. All right, Brian, thanks so much for joining us yet again, and thanks for being another co-host.
Happy to be here. Behind the scenes, Brian.
Well, a big thank you to Behind the Scenes Brian for coming on the program. Always a pleasure to chat adventures with him. It's not the first time he's been on, and I'm sure it won't be the last time he joins us on the podcast. So if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more episodes of the Backroads Bill podcast every single Wednesday morning on your favorite podcast platform. The video version can be found on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel. And of course, everything, whether it's audio or video, can be found on northbayecho.ca. Check out all of the other great podcasts we have for whatever catches your fancy. Of course, with the election coming up on Monday, if you check out Echo Essentials, we actually talked to 4 out of the 5 candidates locally for Nipissing-Temiskaming. So the Green Party was not able to make it. But you can check out all of those individual interviews out. All of them are available now. Gary Keller, the Conservative, coming out a little bit later today. The Liberal, Pauline Rochefort, coming out tomorrow afternoon, which is Thursday. So you can get a bit more of an in-depth look at who you might want to vote for on Monday and all the different candidates. So check out Echo Essentials for those interviews there. So that wraps things up here. Join us again next week for another Backroads Adventure.